Red Mist is a controversial real-life bootleg tape featuring an unaired episode of the popular Nickelodeon series SpongeBob SquarePants. Like the long-lost and yet recently discovered Suicide Mouse tape, Red Mist was purportedly created by a now-imprisoned Scottish animator named Andrew Skinner, who intended to pass the tape off as the Season 4 premiere episode instead of Fear of a Krabby Patty and feature the death of Squidward. Red Mist begins with Squidward preparing to practice his clarinet in his room as SpongeBob and Patrick play merrily outside. Squidward wraps his mouth around the clarinet and is only able to play one note before being interrupted by someone knocking on the door. He walks down and opens the door and discovers that a traveling salesman is at his door. The salesman, a Scottish fish, asks if he could have a moment of Squidward's time. Squidward tells him that he isn't interested and slams the door in the man's face, walking back to his room. The salesman begins knocking again, and Squidward opens the door furiously. The salesman, looking very upset, tells Squidward, "The red mist is coming," and proceeds to walk off, confusing Squidward. Squidward walks back to his room and finally begins playing the clarinet. After performing several off-key notes, SpongeBob and Patrick begin laughing outside, interrupting Squidward yet again. Squidward walks over to the window and yells at the two, telling them to shut up, as he needs to practice for a concert he will be performing at. SpongeBob and Patrick both apologize tearfully and walk back to their respective houses. Squidward, unsure of himself, walks back and begins playing his clarinet again, this time uninterrupted. The scene then fades to red over the course of 12 seconds, and perhaps by glitch, the same scene is repeated once more, which is somewhat common in rough cuts of animation. However, this time, Squidward's eyes have been replaced with new and more realistic eyes with red pupils. Clearly not real, but more realistic than CGI, TV, or animated. The audio is also completely absent from the scene, save for occasional clicks and whistles. After the repeat of the previous scene, a new scene begins with the same red eyes, but at the theater where Squidward is performing his clarinet. The frames in the animation skip every 4 seconds, but the sound remains synced. After an unruly performance of a song he dubbed Red Mist, SpongeBob and Patrick are seen in the crowd booing Squidward, very uncommon for them. The scene pans to reveal the same Scottish salesman sitting next to him, also booing, as Squidward walks back home with his head in his tentacles. What's odd is that the scene actually shows him walking to his house with nothing happening in the background for 3 minutes and 50 seconds before abruptly cutting to red for another 20 seconds just as he arrives at his house. A new scene begins, back to the original cartoon eyes, with Squidward sitting in a chair in his room that night with a blank look on his face for roughly 30 seconds before starting to sob softly. Again, the audio is completely missing for most of the scene until the sobbing begins. This is when the sound of a slight breeze through the forest can be heard in the background. It also begins very mildly zooming in on Squidward's face, only noticeable if you compare 10 seconds of frames side by side. The sound of him sobbing can suddenly be heard, very loudly and severe, as the screen twitches in on itself briefly. The salesman's laugh can also be heard echoing in the background. After another 30 seconds, the screen blurs and twitches violently, and a single frame flashes over the screen. Upon pausing it exactly on the frame, the viewer can see a real-life photo of a deceased 6-year-old boy laying in the forest in his underwear, whose face has been mangled, eye has been popped, and stomach cut open with entrails laying beside him. Next to him, the shadow of the photographer is equivalently visible, with half of its hand appearing to the right of the screen. After this photograph is seen, it cuts back to Squidward sobbing, much louder than before, with what appears to be blood running from his eyes instead of tears, and the sound of the salesman is still heard. The wind in the forest is also played at a much louder volume, but now with the sound of branches snapping and the screams of the young boy heard. After this scene, another scene begins, this time of an 8-year-old girl lying in the forest in a stomach with her in a pool of blood, with her back cut open and entrails laying beside her. The shadow of the photographer is also visible once again. The scene reverts back to Squidward, now with the same realistic red eyes from before, completely silent and no longer sobbing. The The sound of the forest can no longer be heard. Another 3 seconds later, and it cuts back to the sobbing, this time piercing loud and with the sound of the forest heard. The screams of both the young boy and the young girl can be heard mixed together as the song Amazing Grace plays on both the clarinet and bagpipes. During this, 7 frames are seen viewing the same image of the boy laying dead in the woods. Over the course of these frames, the photographer reaches in and grabs the boy's entrails as his remaining eye focuses on the man's hand and even blinks once. It cuts back to Squidward again, this time staring at the viewer in silence as the sound of the salesman echoes, "Do it!" and "The red mist is coming," repeatedly. After 30 seconds of this, the camera reveals to show Squidward holding a realistic gun, looking as though it were photoshopped into the scene. Squidward then lifts the gun into his mouth and fires, with blood shooting out of his head. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for new videos daily. And happy Friday the 13th. The red mist is coming.